Oh yeah. No time to mess around today. I've got a story I want to tell you about my late friend Nigel Croft. But we'll do the top three shit list before that. Where would we be without it? It's the most popular feature. Masses of really positive feedback about that. So on with the shit list. Number three this week is Harvey Keitel. Yeah, the actor Harvey Keitel. Not for the acting, which is fine. Often brilliant. I don't know. I'm thinking Mean Streets, Fingers, maybe. Underrated performance in an underrated film, The Two Jakes, sequel to Chinatown. Somewhat underrated there, and he was excellent in it. No, Harvey's there because he has an upsetting face. Yeah, he does, which isn't his fault, but it's not our fault either. So there he is on the list. Number two this week is a very worthy inclusion. Glad she's there. It's Davina McCall. Davina McCall. Yeah. Um, I want to saw her in half. Yeah. Not as part of a magic trick. This isn't fun. This isn't entertainment. This is serious. I want to saw her in half. Not across like this. Lengthways on a bandsaw from head to toe. Um, I have tried re-education. I've tried numerous interventions of that sort, but the message hasn't got through, and I feel the bandsaw is now the only option. I would always try re-education before opting for the bandsaw, but she simply can't get it through her head that shouting about boring stuff doesn't make it more interesting. No, it doesn't. It just makes it noisier, boring stuff. And she doesn't seem to be able to grasp that. And it's the bandsaw for her. And she's in at number two this week. Number one, bit of a weird one. Not weird because of who it is, because he's been there before, he'll be there again. It's God. But this week it says, I can see on my list here, it says God brackets AWOL end brackets, as if somehow God is absent without leave and not quite here. I don't know where he's supposed to have gone. I don't know where he is, but as of this moment, it would seem that God is AWOL. Maybe an answer will present itself to us later in the show. I wonder where God could be. I wonder where God could be. But I wanted to make a bit of a departure this week and tell you about my friend Nigel Croft, who was a great guy, who died 6 years ago now, quite a long time. And I got to know Nigel when he was working, as he did throughout the time that I knew him, as a checkout person at my local Tesco's. And I got to know him during my booze years, when he would be quite often working the late shift, and I would often be staggering in there at about 11:45 on a work night, having drunk myself into oblivion, and thinking that the best idea with the alarm in the morning just a few short hours away, and the rush for the train just a few short hours away, I seem in those days to think that a good idea at quarter to midnight would be to buy some more booze and drink it. Um, and he was often serving at that time, and we sort of got chatting, and we'd say hi and nod to each other and pass a few words. But then one day he surprised me by I bumped into him in town, and he invited me for a coffee, which kind of freaked me out because I'm not a very sociable type of chap. But I went along, and we chatted about this and that, and he was a really nice guy, very committed Christian. And as I got to know Nigel and his wife Liz, who was also a Christian, they shared a faith together. They also shared a place of work. They met at Tesco's, They both worked there, and after a couple of years of knowing them, they had a son, Joshua, who I also got to know. But yeah, I got to know Nigel quite well over the years, and we had quite a few heart-to-hearts. I mean, mostly we just shoot the shit and talk about movies we'd both seen and music and things like that. But occasionally he talks about his past, and he was a lovely guy. He was a lovely guy when I knew him. He'd do anything for anyone. But I mean, he was massive. He was absolutely massive. He was as tall as me, which is about 6'3", but about twice as wide. And it wasn't by any means all flab. There's a bit of flab there, but there was also a lot of pretty solid muscle, and he was a pretty intimidating guy. And as I got to know him, it became clear that he had been a genuinely intimidating person in his youth. He told me he'd been brought up in care. He came from an abusive household and was taken out of that situation and put into care. And by the time he was a teenager, he was sort of in trouble with the police for petty things, but soon graduated up and became involved in drugs and alcohol, and also became involved with a biker gang and got heavily into all that, and got further and further into the drugs and the alcohol, and was quite open about the fact that he'd been not a nice guy, really. It was difficult to imagine, knowing this sort of gentle giant that I knew. But he told me a bit about it, and all this culminated in Nigel going on a massive bender. He said for 3 or 4 days he barely knew who he was or where he was, and as a result of all this, he ended up really seriously hurting a guy one night, getting into a fight and seriously hurting a guy, and ended up in prison. And it was here that he converted to Christianity, became sort of born again. And we sort of discussed all this, because I'm a dyed-in-the-wool atheist, but we agreed to disagree, and we chat about things. But one interesting thing about Nigel's conversion to Christianity was a tattoo that he'd had done when he was in his sort of at the height of his sort of nihilistic, violent, drug, alcohol, biker phase. He actually had the words "fuck God" tattooed onto his knuckles, and it just always makes me laugh, because he had F-U-C-K G-O-D, and this always made me laugh, no matter how many times I think about it. He had an exclamation mark at the end. It was "fuck God!" exclamation mark tattooed on his knuckles, and he used to joke about it quite a lot. But one night he got pretty serious about the tattoo, and was wondering whether he ought to have it removed, but was then saying that he felt he should keep it as a reminder of his past, and then never ever to go back there. But he was in a bit of turmoil about it, because he had this dream, and we were sat in the pub one night, and he told me about this dream he'd had, where he was at the gates of heaven, waiting to go in, and waiting for God to come and gather him in. And he said that in the dream he put his hands behind his back, because he was so self-conscious about the "fuck God" exclamation mark on his knuckles. And then eventually God came down, and he was very disturbed, because God, he said in his dream, looked like Clint Eastwood as Dirty Harry. And God said, come in, and what are you hiding behind your back? And Nigel in the dream showed him and sort of said, "I'm sorry, Lord." And the Clint Eastwood God said, "Well, no, it's fine, but do you, punk?" And Nigel said, "What, Lord?" He said, "Well, do you want to fuck me?" And Nigel wasn't sure what to do. And then Nigel said that the Dirty Harry God just turned around, took down his trousers and presented his arse to the dream Nigel, and said, "Look, here it is. Do you want a shot at the holiest of holies?" And then he woke up, and he was genuinely disturbed by this. I was kind of trying not to laugh, I have to say, but was also concerned for him because it was clearly giving him pause for thought and really had disturbed him. So I mean, I didn't quite know what to say, but I said, "Well, Nigel, the way you've described your relationship with your God to me, your God isn't the sort of person who's going to judge you for a tattoo. And besides, it's a dream. We can't help what we dream." We sort of talked it through. But I was thinking about that a couple of years later when Nigel had a cerebral hemorrhage and slipped into a coma. And Liz sort of called me to the hospital to sort of come and say goodbye to Nigel and offer her some support. And it was just a terrible time. It was absolutely awful. I was never going to see my mate again. He was there, but he wasn't there, sort of thing. And it was a really awful day. But I remember thinking very much about the time he told me about the dream, and I was sort of thinking, and I was thinking about him going up to heaven and meeting God. And, it was weird, but during that time, I mean, Liz was distraught, absolutely beside herself with grief, and she kept continually going on about one of the monitors was beeping as they do, and it was beeping like beep beep beep, and Liz kept crying and saying, no, he's going to think he's at work. He's going to think he's at work, sort of, on the checkout with scanning the. I don't want him to think he's at work, and it was terrible. But then there was a moment when she was going on about this, when a nurse was in the room, and the nurse and I kind of caught each other's eyes, and we both kind of had to stifle a laugh, sort of that. It just rose up out of nowhere. And unfortunately, Liz didn't pick up on this, but I mean, I felt pretty bad. I felt bad anyway because my mate was effectively dead. Yeah, I was thinking about this, and Liz was saying, "Oh, he's going to think he's at work," and I was thinking about Nigel and the fuck God and the dream, and God proffering his buttocks to him, and then a couple of years later, Nigel died about 6 years ago. I think Josh, his son, was about 3 at the time, so I'm in terrible time. Not that there's a good time, terrible age to lose your father. But I guess he didn't remember Nigel too much. But then, about 3 years later, when Josh was 6, an unbelievably terrible thing happened. And Josh was riding his bike down the pavement one day and came to a junction and simply didn't stop at the junction. Nobody knows why. Just carried on. He knew he could use his brakes. He was only 6, but he was a perfectly competent cyclist. He could use his brakes, but he didn't this day, and he was killed instantly. And Liz had actually moved away by this time. She moved away not long after Nigel died to be closer to her mum, but we kept in touch via email and by the phone. And one night she phoned me up in a state as you would be. I mean, can't imagine the loss of a child and what that does to you. It's unimaginable and best not thought about, really. But Liz called me up one night and she was distraught because, as I said, she'd shared a very strong Christian faith with Nigel, and now, 3 years later, with the loss of Josh, she was really in a bad place. She was doubting God, and she was just saying to me over and over again, "Look, mate, how did this happen? Where was God? What was God doing?" The exact moment Josh rode out into traffic, was hit by that van, what was God doing? Where was he? Why did he abandon us? what does it mean? What was he doing at that moment? And I said, I mean, Liz knew that I'm an atheist, but I came up with the best answer I could, and I said, well, Liz, maybe he was busy being fucked by Nigel. And the bitch hung up on me. And I've not spoken to her since. But that's pretty much what I say every time somebody sort of asks me. Terrible things happen, and people say, "Well, how could this happen? How could these terrible things happen? Where was God?" And I always say to them, "Well, maybe he was being fucked by Nigel." That's my best guess, anyway. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that story. I hope you found it of some use somehow. I haven't had time to plug the old Clanging Chimes, not the Clanging Chimes, the Free State of Garthlong, but do search Free State Garthlong and buy a copy of this stellar book. It's fantastic, fantastic stuff. Every single word written by me, the good ones, the bad ones, all of them. It's all fantastic. Free State Garthlong, do buy a copy. The figures are really disappointing. We haven't had any takers so far. Really, really depressing. You've really disappointed me on this one. The big chin off last week, Jimmy Hill, Kirk Douglas, also disappointing. Jimmy Hill won. I'd had a 20 on Kirk that I'm never going to see again now. And Jimmy's been crying about it all around town, as you'd expect. If you see Jimmy, give him a punch in the lung pipes from me, the Clanging Chimes of Doom. Do that. And we'll be back. We'll be back with a more conventional show next time. More fun and larks. Try not to be too sad, won't you? Do try. I know it's hard.